Hi there, BookTube. It's Roz, and I've got 3 super short novels to talk to you about today, all by women in translation. Because this is kind of by way of being a Women in Translation Month, August, and Shorty September crossover. Because in the first week of September, I read 3, as I say, tremendous short novels by women in translation. Now, 2 of them I mentioned in my September TBR video, but in that, that's these 2, Rue and Tiamo, and we'll come on to them. But first, I'm going to tell you about another, because in that video, I said I would be really interested to hear people's sort of recommendations of women authors available in translation that I might have not yet read, not yet heard about. And the wonderful reader and commenter Ariane Fowler came up with one, and she said, have you yet read anything by Nona Fernández? Because she'd recently read her book Space Invaders and was really impressed by it. And I thought, no, I haven't, but obviously I should. And so I found one, and I did, and that was The Twilight Zone. Now, Fernández published that in 2016, but the translation by Natasha Wimmer came out in 2021, so relatively recently. Now, Fernández is, as I say, from Chile. She's a writer and an actress. She makes her bread and butter writing soap operas. That pays the bills and enables her to write relatively kind of unconventional and quite political novels about her country, about its recent history, of of dictatorship, disappearances. Yeah. She was born in 1971, so in effect, she grew up under the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. Right wing. There was, it was a period when, on one level, Chile was sort of, prospering and successful. On another level, to achieve that, there was, repression and terror. And that's the challenge that Fernández sets herself in writing these novels, in that, how do you successfully write a novel that conveys what it means to live in a place where, on one level, people, get on with their lives, children go to school, parents go to work, do the shopping, do the laundry, but on another level, your mother might witness someone being snatched from the street on her way home from work. A school friend's father may turn out to have been an intelligence officer. There might be a house in your neighbourhood that appears normal from the outside and is actually an interrogation centre, a place where people are tortured. How do you write about that strange kind of double existence going on in a country? And she uses 2 approaches in The Twilight Zone, both of which I found really interesting and quite successful. One is she kind of, the protagonist, who, as I say, is the same age as her, same, also a girl growing up, same period, that's why I say there's a sort of autobiographical element to this, but nevertheless, she's a fictional protagonist. It's not a memoir. So this girl is really struck by an incident in her teens that she sees or hears about a real life person who was a member of the intelligence services. Well, he was doing his military service and got kind of detailed to work with the sort of repressive internal security forces and got kind of drawn into that. But in 1984, he walked into a magazine office and basically said, that he wanted to confess. He wanted to tell his story. He wanted to make that public because he couldn't live with it anymore. And in the novel, the protagonist refers to him as the man who tortured people. And she's almost obsessed with him and his story and why he did that and who he connected with, and what it basically, we keep revolving back to him, to that, to and get a kind of a series of stories of kind of fictional reimaginings of real life people who disappeared during that period, and that the man who tortured people was in some way connected with their torture, their death. Brilliantly done, quite hard to read at times, quite dark. She tries to kind of almost temper that perhaps by the second kind of strategy she uses, which is to draw on popular culture. Things like, well, the Twilight Zone of the title, the TV series, if you're old enough to remember it, it's about kind of slightly spooky or supernatural things or surreal and unusual situations. Ghostbusters, the Avengers movie, various things like that she brings in as a way, I suppose, of trying to both convey that, well, yes, that slightly surreal thing of like you've got this life going on the surface and then this other thing going on beneath it that you may know or not know or half know or see moments of, but then that will ultimately is revealed. That approach sometimes works absolutely brilliantly. Sometimes the sort of use of those sort of cultural references, it almost is slightly forced for me, slightly overextended, but I know I really liked the way she sets out to use that and felt overall that device, that approach worked. Overall, it's an intense short novel. It's moving, very moving in places, and often quite shocking, and I would absolutely recommend it as something to read, particularly if you've got, I don't know, a strong stomach and you are interested in understanding more about Chile and more about kind of what it was like to grow up as a Chilean, say, during Pinochet, and how you come to terms with that later. Because one of the strange things is, sometimes when a dictator falls, the whole country is turned upside down and they are prosecuted or, assassinated, whatever. Whereas that's not how things played out in Chile. I won't go into more of the detail, but you will really come to understand that reading this novel. Now, the other two books, these two, are kind of more explicitly kind of autofiction, I would say, or, almost on an ascending scale, if I start with this one. So, Rue by Kim Thúy. Now, Kim Thúy was born in Vietnam, in what was then Saigon, in 1968, so during the Vietnamese War. She, at the age of 10, her family made the tough decision to flee Vietnam. They'd been a kind of a wealthy family, I suppose, associated with the sort of South Vietnamese regime to some extent, and so life under life in communist Vietnam after the war became increasingly difficult for them. So, like many others, hundreds of thousands, in fact, they became boat people. They fled by boat. They survived. They were refugees in Malaysia for a substantial part of a year, and then they were resettled in Canada, in French part of Canada, and that's where Thúy moved, age 10, and grew up and lives as an adult. So, she's now a French Canadian. And the protagonist in her book, Tin, the facts of her life are kind of broadly the same. But this is not straight memoir. It is a novel, and a really interestingly constructed one, because it's basically 144 kind of vignettes, I suppose you describe them, like memories of Tin's life. They feel very real, they feel very vivid. We jump around in time, but each one is connected to the one before and the one after in some theme or emotion, or or that's the way memory works, isn't it? Our memories do leap from thing to thing. They don't follow a sort of linear route, and that's the beauty of the book. She writes about, and I think Kim Thúy really wanted this to express this in this story. She writes about the kindness, the many kindnesses that she and her family experienced when they came to Canada. But she's also writing about dislocation, about trauma, what it is to be a migrant, what it is to have to sort of have a settled life and then have a period of difficulty and then have to make a new life in a new place. One of the themes of the book is her as understanding as an adult and as a mother herself of what seemed often quite sort of harsh, even cruel behaviour by her mother when she was a child and a young woman. It's a very beautifully written, beautifully translated book. The translator is Sheila Fischman. I haven't read anything translated by her before, but I certainly would again. She kind of captures a kind of poetic kind of imagery of these little vignettes. It's moving, it's thoughtful, it has a kind of a warmth and an energy whilst being quite reflective, quite almost meditative. Definitely a special book, one that I'm really pleased to have read, and I came to read it because of Jolene and Lindy doing their little project about the best Canadian novels of the 21st century. And because this was published in 2009 and the translation came out in 2012, the genesis of the book was interesting in that Thúy was, kind of into, well on in her life, was running a restaurant. One of her restaurant customers who became a friend bought her a notebook and kind of gave her that notebook and said, think about writing, Kim. And she did. And what started as little kind of almost like random notes kind of built into the novel. Interesting connection that with this book, which I'll come to in a minute. But yeah, they came together as a novel. And in 2023, this was made into a film. And that friend who gave the notebook and kind of started her writing it is an actress and acts in that film. Not as her friend, but as a character in the story. I'd love to see the film, but I'm not sure it's ever came out over here. It's French Canadian. Anyway, definitely, a positive recommendation. Book number 3. Okay, this is Tiamo. It was published in 2020 in Norwegian. It was translated by Martin Aitken and came out in English in 2022, so relatively new. Hanne Orstavik, the author, has written 14 novels before this one. She's one of Norway's sort of most acclaimed contemporary novelists. I've never read anything by her, which I found slightly shocking, but actually only 4 of her novels, 3 other than this, are available in English so far, all relatively recently, although she's been writing since the 1990s, but, I think the first one was published maybe 2009 and the last couple more recently than that. And so, she's not perhaps as well known in the Anglophone world as she should be and could be. How to describe this book? It's called a novel, But Ørstavik herself says that was essentially a decision by her Norwegian publisher. I would say this is much closer to being a memoir than a novel, really. It's barely fictionalized at all. It's based on Ørstavik's marriage. She, in later life, she sort of in midlife, she basically started a relationship with her Italian publisher, a very charismatic character, really interesting in his own right, but we won't go into that here. They became a couple. She moved from Norway to Italy to join him, so they could, because she could write anywhere, whereas he was running an Italian publishing house. So moved there together. A glorious relationship, I think. But about a year into that, he became ill and was eventually diagnosed with stomach cancer. So they hadn't been together all that long, and embarked on surgery and chemotherapy, but carried on with their lives, with their work, her writing, him as a publisher, traveling together. They got married, but with this backdrop of cancer treatment. And then in January of 2020, she came to the realization that he was not going to recover. So, and this was, after a couple of years of treatment. But she wasn't really able to talk to him about that, because he was kind of choosing to stay in a place where he didn't acknowledge that he was terminally ill. And so, being a writer, what she did was she started to write things down instead. She needed to talk about what they together were experiencing. So she talked to the page. And the notes that she wrote over kind of like a 10-day period in January of 2020 are the basis of this book. And she says, in effect, she wrote it over those 10 days. Obviously, she then revised and edited it and so on. But that is the core of the book, was those 10 days in January. And she looks back on their time together. So it's a book about grief, but not a book about grief after a bereavement. It's about grief knowing that the person that you're living with and that you love is going to die. What a kind of tough and yet essential subject, because she's writing about mortality. She's writing about love. She's writing about having to shift between being lover and being carer for the one that you love. It's a really moving, intensely moving book. It's written in quite a kind of cool, sparse language. When you're writing about something that is this intensely emotional, it's almost like that's how you need to write it. There's no melodrama to this book. It's kind of almost unemotional and factual in the way that she writes it, but as a reader that has huge emotional impact. I think Martin Aitken's done an extraordinary job in translating that and conveying that tone. Ørstavik's husband died in June of 2020, and this book came out in October. And, as I say, it's a special book. I would say do read it, but, when you're in a strong place, because, it is, raw and heartbreaking, and makes you think about the people that you love and what would happen if they fell ill and if they were to die, or maybe you've been through that experience and it will resonate with you in a different way. it's a warm and loving book. I don't want to give the impression that it's constantly grim. As I say, I would urge you to read it, but obviously this kind of subject matter, you have to make a choice of whether that's okay for you. There we go. What an amazing start to my September reading. I hope your September has started equally well.